I dream for all of us to own wardrobes with garments made from sustainable sources, including fair wages for the makers. I aim to motivate and inspire viewers to see the clothes they wear as an expression of their personality and their beliefs. This is the Slow Wardrobe. Come and have a look. Hello, welcome to the next episode of the Slow Wardrobe podcast. I've got some works in progress to show you, some finished objects and a mini haul from a visit to Tribe Yarns that I made recently. I'll start with my finished objects. You're staring at them already. The first one is the little linen scarf stroke shawl that I worked on for ages and ages. It took me so long to finish. And it was not that it was difficult to knit. It's not actually difficult to knit, but it's relatively slow going compared to regular knitting because it's knitted in the linen stitch, which is kind of funny considering that it's linen yarn as well. And I was intrigued with how the linen stitch combined with linen yarn would work, and I'm so pleased with it. I'm so happy with it. What I've used for it is one of the little multicolored linen kits that I sell that have 6 little hanks of 25 grams of yarn in it. So the total length of the kit comes to 900 meters because this yarn is 600 meters per 100 grams, just like my soliloquy is. And I figured that if I made a pattern that would work with this yarn, it would work with soliloquy as well without making any substitutions other than the yarn. So here it is. The pattern caters for 2 different sizes. This is the small size, and it's got a wingspan of close to 5 foot, but it's not very deep. So it's great to wear twice around your neck like I was just doing. It has increases in the middle, as you can see, which creates that shape. You start at the top with the largest number of stitches, and then you work your way down until you've got no stitches left. While increasing in the middle. It's just that you increase slower than the number of stitches you lose at the edges. Now, because you're changing color every couple of rows, you end up with lots of ends of yarn at the end, and you keep those on purpose because you're going to use those to tie these tiny little tassels onto once the whole scarf is finished. And you literally have 1 tassel for each set of ends that you create by changing color. The other thing that happens because of it being the linen stitch is that the colors slightly merge together. So you get a little bit of a fusion of colors, and it looks very different from the front than it looks from the back. That's the front, that's the smooth linen stitch side, and then the back looks very bumpy, like this. I'll see if I can show you a close-up of both sides as well right now. But this is the end result. I will do a little tutorial in this podcast for how you make one of the little tassels, and I will show you the linen stitch in action as well. It's very easy. I'll show you a different way of wearing it. I had a trice around my neck when we started, but this is very effective as well. I like wearing it a little bit asymmetrical like that. And it's amazing how much the little tassels add to the overall effect. Like I said, the pattern comes with 2 different sizes. This is the small one. The big one, it increases the size from 5 foot to about 6 or 6.5, and the depth from 1 foot to about 10 to 12 inches to about 14 to 16 inches. And you'll still be able to knit the larger size out of 150 gram set of mini hanks. So it's very economical in that respect. Same goes for soliloquy. Well, same goes, something else actually goes for soliloquy. You would be able to make the small size out of 1 hank of soliloquy, 100 grams of soliloquy yarn, which is 600 meters. So for example, you out of soliloquy could knit the large one in one color and then do tassels in a contrasting color. Or you could do the body of the shawl in 2 different colors, 50-gram hanks, just 2 stripes, 2 color striped, or a single color and a multicolor striped, for example. So there are different possibilities, and I've put some different choices up on the website for the kits. There are kits for this particular colorway, but there will also be some kits for soliloquy in different permutations. So have a look and see what you think. The other possibility is to use one of the linen gradients. I'm knitting up a linen gradient into one of these at the moment to show you how gradient colors work in this kind of configuration, in this linen stitch. It's stunning. It's so nice. In fact, if I can, I'll put a little photograph of a close-up of it here so you get an idea. It's so nice. So the gradient kits are available as well with this pattern. I hope you'll enjoy it as much as I do. So glad that I finished it. The next one will not take me as long as this. There it is. The second finished project I have to share with you is behind me. It's the Astrid jumper by Junko Okamoto. It doesn't look as great on the dummy as it looks on me when I wear it, because I have blocked it so that it sits really nicely on my shoulders. And on this little skinny mini, of course, it kind of drops down a little bit. Still, you get an idea of what it's like. This is another project that took me quite a long time to finish. And it was in no small part because I don't think I'm a natural color and fair isle intarsia knitter. I do find my speed is fast enough, so I make progress, but somehow I find it more of a struggle. I don't really get into a rhythm as I do with just plain stockinette or lace. With lace, even with cables, I get into a rhythm that I find very satisfying. You know, I get into the zone, if you like, but I don't with stranded color work. And although my floats are neat and I don't have any pulling and it all blocks out fine, somehow I don't enjoy the process as much. And that means, because I do so much of the knitting that I do in the evening, which is crazy, but there you have it, I still haven't gotten out of that habit. I tend to go for kind of comfort knitting rather than really dedicate myself to the knitting 100%. I'm doing something else at the same time, watching TV or listening to an audiobook. I've kind of gone nuts on audiobooks recently. Have you ever fallen into a rabbit hole like that? Well, audiobooks are mine at the moment. So I do something else at the same time, and then it helps if I'm kind of in a flow with my knitting. And with this, I just don't get into as much of a flow. But as I saw the pattern I really liked what I saw, which spurred me on. And it's not a super long sweater. It's kind of wide and boxy. So it takes a while. It's done. You're doing it top down, but it's not super long. So before you know it, the end is in sight on the body. And then, hooray in my case, no more color work on the sleeves, but because the sleeves are done with a textured pattern and cables. So they're also kind of 3/4 length, so they're not so long, and therefore relatively easy and quick to make. And because of how you work it, once you finish the sleeves, the whole thing is done. There's no sewing up. It's all done in one piece. I block everything I do these days with the steam iron that we have here at the studio. But if I didn't have it here at the studio, I would use my steam iron at home. I prefer the instant gratification of a steam block so much over a wet block that takes a lot of time to pin out and then have to leave it and then hope that it all works the way I had envisaged. So I'd prefer this, and I don't know whether I have an advantage in the sense that I don't actually measure whether I end up with the exact sizes that the pattern calls for. I end up with proportions and sizes that look and feel pleasing to me. So I give that a first go, the steam block. Then, like with this, I try it on and I see how it sits. And in this case, it was, oh, actually, I want to do a little bit more work around the neck. So I assess what I want that work to be, take it off, and then steam block it again. So that's how I kind of morph and mold my projects rather than wet blocking them. And it works a treat for me, including things like little rolling edges. The yarn behaves beautifully when it heats up from a steam block. So the irons that I use when I'm steam blocking like that are quite hot, but I use a lot of steam, and that's the art. If you use a hot iron, you will scorch your yarn, but if you use a lot of steam with it, then the steam will stop the yarn from scorching. It makes it very soft and pliable. The heat does, and the water does, but it won't scorch. And that works really, really well, including with things like the linen. Same thing. This has just been steam blocked and it behaves exactly the same as wool. You'll be surprised because, of course, as a yarn, it's very different. There's not much stretch, etc. But the stitches do the same thing. They kind of relax and fall into place when you steam block them. So I can highly recommend steam blocking in that respect. Give it a go. And just do small bits at a time to see, get a feel of how it goes. You can even steam block swatches if you want to stay on the safe side and you're worried about putting a steam iron on your finished project. Then steam block some swatches so you start to get the hang and the feel of it. Highly recommend it. So then on to what I'm working on at the moment. I really only have one set of socks on the needles that I'm working on in the evenings at the moment, which is a set of socks for myself, pair of socks for myself. And I'm in absolute love with this yarn. I bought it on sale here in the village. We are very lucky in the village that we've got my studio, and of course I sell yarns, but there is a proper haberdashery and yarn shop in Greyshot as well, called Pins and Needles. Highly recommend it. If you're from the area here, go and have a look. Fiona is an absolute treat and she's got some fabulous yarns. Now, this is a yarn that I think is being discontinued, but I'll put the needle in the name in the down bar. It's a commercial yarn, and I wonder whether it's being discontinued because it must be an absolute pig to dye, because it's very, very, very highly speckled. Can you see that? You can see the very, very small, busy drips and drabs and speckles in the ball, and how beautifully marled that knits up in the sock. I am completely in love with it. I adore it. And I'm knitting it on 2¼ millimeter needles, which gives me a really nice and firm fabric. But I'm sure that there's alpaca in it because I can see the longer alpaca hairs sticking out of the knitting. I don't know whether I can make that visible at all. I'm actually quite tempted at the moment to knit a stripy jumper that has this color in it and then work it together with one of the results of my Tribe Yarns haul. This is the base color of this jumper is the Biche et Bûche Le Petit Lamb's wool, and I absolutely loved knitting with it. And when I went to see Milli at Tribe Yarns the other week to go and see her fabulous new location, another recommendation of another yarn shop, go and see Milli in Richmond if you can. It's such a lovely space. It's very calming and very welcoming. Well, you know what Milli's like, and the high ceilings and everything. It's an absolute pleasure to be there. It's just like a haven, a proper haven. Anyway, so Milli had just received a shipment of the Biche et Bûche Le Cashmere and lamb's wool. It's got the same running length as the Le Petit lamb's wool, and I bought 5 hanks of this, having no idea what to do with it yet, but I bought 5 hanks for this one. That's what the pattern called for. And I used less than 4. This thing weighs nothing. It is stranded with, that probably helps, it is stranded with my soliloquy yarn, which is finer than this yarn. The soliloquy is 600 meters per 100 grams. This is 500 meters per 100 grams, so is this. And this is more bouncy, more of a woolly spun yarn, and soliloquy is more towards a worsted spun because it is spun with a relatively high ply to make it hard wearing. So it was no problem with the color work. The poofiness of the base color more than makes up for the fact that the color work is done in a yarn that's slightly finer. So the resulting fabric is lovely. I'll show you a close-up of it. And with the two together, you end up with a very, very light sweater. So the whole thing weighs less than 300 grams. And it's not small, you know, it comes down to my hips. It's got these wide 3/4 length sleeves. So it looks generous. It doesn't look stingy or too small, but it's less than 300 grams in weight. So back to my visit with Milli. When I saw this, I thought, well, I'll work it together with something else. I don't know what yet, but if I buy 5 of them, then I'll definitely have plenty. Then knitting with this, I am going to do a bit of a test to see how this works striped with that. Whether I have to play with the widths of the stripe so that you see enough of this marbling, or whether go for really narrow stripes, even go for 1 and 1. I'll do the helical stranded knitting that Grace O'Neill shows very effectively in one of her videos on YouTube. I think it's called helical knitting. And it is really for mixing 2 hanks together of the same color. If you've got hand dyed yarn and you want to prevent pooling, for example, then rather than changing balls every couple of rows or rounds, it's for knitting in the round, you do this helical knitting technique, which effectively translates into 1 round in with 1 hank and then 1 round with the other hank, and you keep alternating that. And I like the idea of trying that with these 2 to see whether there's enough of the marling yet left, or whether I need to do wider stripes, more like this jumper, to get the right effect. I will report back as soon as I know. But that's my plan at the moment. And this is more like a 400 meters per 100 grams. This is 500 meters per 100 grams. So I think between the 2, it'll work out fine. I think I'll knit on a 3¼ millimeter needle to see what kind of fabric I get, do a bit of swatching to work out my stripes, and then knit another jumper, or maybe a cardigan, I'm not sure. I think I like the idea of a jumper because then I can knit in the round. Maybe even something I'll steek. I've never steeked before. Should I steek? Let me know what you think. Okay, back to where I was, works in progress. I have done a couple of pairs of socks now, knitting for myself, that I didn't give a cuff. And I like that. I like socks that are longer without a cuff that I then just ruche down towards my shoes. I wear a lot of kind of ankle high boots, especially in winter, and I love to just have a pair of crumpled socks sticking out just above that. And for no particular reason whatsoever, I thought, oh, I'll do a little contrast. And what I did is I cast on twice as many stitches as I need for the socks, knitted 2 or 3 rows, and then did a whole round of knit 2 together to get to the right size, the right amount of stitches. So I've got this little frilly bit at the top, which I thought was just a nice way of finishing the sock other than just nothing. And the yarn that I used for it was some of the leftover yarn of the socks that I knitted for Andrea that I showed you last time. So it picks up on the red and pink that is in the sock yarn. I'm nearly at the point of decreasing for the toes. I'm knitting them top down, just the standard sock recipe. I have partridge heel to make it nice and strong, and then do a gusset and go around the corner, keeping my number of stitches the same, 60 stitches on the needles throughout on 2¼ millimeter needle. And that's a recipe that seems to work for me really well with pretty much all the standard sock yarns that I buy. So that's what I'm knitting at the moment. Soon to be joined by another jumper for myself. I've also got a beautiful hank of yarn that Sharon from 5 Moons dyed for me, one of her sock yarns, and I've given that to my husband for his birthday. His birthday was in the middle of October. So I'm about to cast on a pair of socks for him in that. It's beautiful and multicolored and very rich, warm, jewel colors. I think he'll love it. And I'll show you that next time as well, because I'll be well underway with it, hopefully. Famous last words. Okay, what else am I working on? Okay, one other project that I'm going to be working on before I show you some news. This is a large shawl, very large cashmere shawl by a German brand called Rundholz. And I'm a bit of a Rundholz fan. Some of their clothes are very different and kind of out there, very edgy and unusual in their shaping. They very often have raw edges. They very often combine different fabrics together in a garment, unusual shaping, a bit of an urchin look together with the kind of shoes that they do. I really, really enjoy their clothes. Their cashmere wraps are at least 7 or 8 foot long and about 3.5 foot wide, and it's just a big rectangle of machine knitted cashmere. I really love the quality of their cashmere, and I love being able to put a bulky big scarf around my neck, big wrap around my neck and wear it here. I've bought one of those secondhand on eBay very recently, again for my husband's birthday, because he ends up stealing my cashmere wrap when he's working from home and wears it when he's working in his home office. So this is one that I bought on eBay, and the seller discovered that it had some holes in it, so we haggled on the price. And when it arrived, it turned out that the holes were a bit worse than I anticipated. However, opportunity knocks. I'll show you some of the holes. And this is where people who hate darning and repairing will probably crash and faint, because it looks so sad. It's proper damage. It's proper moth damage. Here you go. Oh, you can see them, yeah. So it has this section of some small holes and some larger ones in one of the corners, but when I hold it to the light, there is damage of smaller holes, pretty much, I don't know if you can see those, smaller holes pretty much throughout the shawl. The thing is, it's huge, so even with the holes in it, you don't really notice it when you wear it. So that's not a big deal there. The cashmere is still in stunning condition. The moths agreed. But here is a beautiful opportunity for me to do some visible mending there, especially with those bigger holes. So, and I've got, you can see them a little bit here in the corner, I've got 96 different colors of darning wool from Sajou, the French brand Sajou. And with these darning wools, every strand of it, you can see it here actually, you can see them sticking out at the end. Every strand consists of 4 ends, and those 4 ends are there so you can split them. So instead of sewing with a yarn that's already very thin, a thread that's already very thin, as you can see it running over my hand, that's the 4 strands held together. So if you split that and work with only one of those, you can work with an extremely fine, beautifully strong, because it's made to be sewn with, beautifully strong thread that is soft and woolly. And if you do Swiss darning where you copy knit stitches, you can approximate the fineness of a knit like this in these fine yarns. Of course, it's a labor of love. It doesn't go very fast, but together with the tiny needles that I still have some of as well, check them out on my website if you're interested. If you like this idea of very fine darning work, I actually still have, I'm going to find it here. Yeah, I'll show you some super fine needles, both circulars as well as double pointed needles. See if I can make this visible. These are DPNs that are 0.7 millimeter in diameter. Can you believe it? And I have circulars that are the same. This is a 32-inch circular with tips that again are 0.7 millimeter. That's where they start, 0.7, but then there is 1 millimeter, 1.2, 1.5, 1.75, and then up to 2 millimeters. So either for knitting, very, very fine work and very small stitches, or for picking up stitches on something that you are repairing, these needles are fantastic. And they're not expensive. They, of course, last a lifetime, especially if you don't use them that often. They're by Haya, and I've got them available on the website. So next time I'll show you progress. I'm going to get started on this later this week, and at the next episode I'll show you how I get on with the really big hole that I showed you, which really is about 1 by 1 inch in terms of size. So there are proper missing stitches there. There's bits of knitting missing. I'm going to see if I can copy the fineness of this knitting with 1 strand of the Sajou darning wool and a set of the super, super fine needles, the 0.7 millimeter needles. So I will take photographs or I'll do a bit of filming of it, but my idea is to show you what that looks like and how I get on with it. Wonderful opportunity to have a bit of a challenge to see how fine I can make this darning work. And it's a beautiful example again of turning something that is initially damage into an enhancement of the finished thing. And going back to our knitting in general, but also the clothes that we wear, I love using or seeing clothes as being on a journey with me. And I may start with a garment just like I bought it, but then I may change it or embellish it or alter it as I get older and the garment ages with me. I try to pass on the same thing to my kids, actually, to steer them away from fast fashion and cheap fabrics, and most importantly, synthetic fabrics, and try to impart on them the value of buying garments that are made by people who've been paid a fair wage for it, out of fabrics that will last and not disintegrate on the second or third wash, and that you will wear because they reflect your personality rather than some fad. Hope you understand what I'm talking about and agree with it. And the earlier we can educate or make aware the young people around us about the idea of following your own groove and dressing yourself in a way that reflects your personality rather than the personality of the group or somebody you identify with, the better. Okay, so next bit, my mini haul from Tribe Yarns. Got one of them standing here. You may have seen in the past that I bought one of the yarn bowls that Milli had that were made by this very, very cool pottery, American pottery. And Milli has had one of these mugs for a long time. It's traveled all over the world with her, and it has survived multiple falls. It's apparently fairly indestructible. And the pottery made yarn bowls in this same design. I bought one of those last year, serious treat, but boy, it's a work of art. It's got prime position on the lounge table in my house, and it tends to have an unfinished project in it that I can just then grab when I fancy it. It just looks great. So Milli had had some more yarn bowls and mugs as well this time, and here's one of the mugs. And rather than asking her to send it to me, I said, just hold on to it, and as soon as I have a chance, I'll come and collect it from your new location. Still took me a month to get there, but at least I did. So just the week before last, I think, I went to collect my mug. And of course, I couldn't leave it at that. I had to buy other things too. Child in a sweet shop is like, I've got all the stuff around me, but okay, no, I've seen that before, right? So of course, like I said, I got the Biche and Bouche cashmere and lamb's wool blend after having loved knitting with this. This should be even more buttery. My gosh, it feels fantastic. This color, if you're interested, is called dark gray, and I bought 5 of them, but she's got lots of other colors as well. I bought more though, not yarn, just this yarn, but look at this. By Trava and Wool, hand-dyed yarn and fiber with plant extracts and plants and some insects, says the label. And this is a little project bag. Oh, I can put my sock in it. Oh, look at it. Oh my gosh. I am completely besotted. Look at this. With my little project in it. And the beautiful embroidery on the outside. Isn't that a complete treat? It is cornflower dyed with indigo and marigold. Written on the inside of the bag. Show you that as well. Handwritten. It was dated the 12th of October of this year. So I bought it just a couple of weeks after it was even made. And so it's lined. It's got this beautiful, and then it's closed because of course it's kind of sewn together, turned, and then it's closed with a visible line of stitches. This is what I mean with embellishing things that you make and use. I absolutely adore it. So that was one, but I didn't leave it at that. I then sew this. Oh, I'll open it up. It's a needle case. Look, inside all the different sections to put your needle tips in, with a little flap. Look at that. Same brand, Trava and Wool. And just stunning. Here, this fabric, either from dyeing or from light, has got irregularities in the color. It all just adds. Just an unfinished strip of, looks like the same color as that, slightly different fabric, slightly thinner. I absolutely love it. It's such a good example of the stuff I was referring to and I was thinking about when talking about that big wrap. Just embellishing it, making it better. Dyed with woad, dyed with woad. OAK, one of a kind, I guess. So this has been dyed with woad. That's what that says here. I don't actually know. But, you know, it doesn't matter. It's so lovely and so precious. The fabric that was used to make the little pockets, the needle tip pockets, is very, very fine, thin cotton lawn. So is this inside. And then the flap and the outside are of slightly heavier fabric, feels like linen. And then same visible stitches for the edges, and it's just lush. And I think the prices are unbelievable for what it is. I cannot recommend this highly enough. I think don't quote me on this, but I think this was £22 and this was 24. I mean, come on. Made by hand from scratch. Unbelievable. I absolutely love it. So, I don't get any commission saying this, by the way. This is just me gushing about other people's work. I just love it. Anyway, what else did I buy? I bought the latest Amirisu magazine as well. So that, together with the yarn and together with my two gorgeous bags and my mug, was my most recent yarn haul. I don't have a lot of yarn hauls because at the shows where I exhibit, I don't get much of an opportunity to walk around, so I don't often buy. So I'm thrilled. Feels like I've got proper loot with my skull mug. Yarn pirate! Okay. Last little bit of this section is to just do a big shout out about the Muka yarn. I was already selling the Muka Elena in the cream and in the grey, but just now, recently arrived, I also have it in dark brown. Been waiting for it for ages. And you can see those three together. They are lush together. So they are beautiful for some of, for example, some of the Junko Okamoto designs where she works with the Muka yarn, with the Muka Elena. There's some really, really nice designs where she uses the three colors or two of the colors. And especially if you want some more contrast than these two give you, then there's now that dark one as well. Meanwhile, so that's all three of those are available on the website now. And Sharon from Five Moons Yarns is re-dyeing the multicolor that I was selling of the Elena, both in the colorway that I had it, which was this beautiful combination of reds and green and some brown and some mustard. It was really, really nice multicolor. I showed it in my last podcast, but I've also asked her to do a colorway that goes into the blues and greens and teals, so that there's a colorway with reds and a colorway with blues to choose from for color work that is more bright and more varied than just the natural colors. I expect to have those towards the end of this month. So the new stock of the multicolored Elena dyed by Sharon, end of November, that should appear on the website, and I'll show it in the next podcast. I'm going to show you how to knit the linen stitch. This is a sample I'm in the middle of. It's another sample for the Kwasten scarf, my new pattern. This time not knitted in a multicolor linen, but in one of the gradients. This is the moth gradient. And because the linen stitch ends up mixing your colors a little bit, you'll see in a minute why and how that happens, a gradient becomes even more subtle when knitted up like this. You get these really nice diffused transitions from one main color to the next main color. To show you the linen stitch in action, it would be quite difficult to do that with these yarns because their gradation is so gradual. So to make it more clear and more contrastful, I've grabbed one of the little bits that I had left from the first sample that I knitted, the bright yellow. And as you can see already here on the needle where I started the row, you can see that every other stitch is purple. That's because you only knit every other stitch. We are on the knit side of the work, the right side of the work, which looks almost woven, and you can see all the little loops that run in front of the stitches. That's why you can't recognize the normal V shape of your stitches as easily. Every V stitch has got a little loop running in front of it. And I'm about to show you how that happens. Looking up very up close here, you can see that again on the left hand needle, only every other stitch has been knitted. This was a stitch that was knitted in the previous row, the purl row. This is a stitch that has the yarn running in front of it. This stitch was knitted, or purled rather, because I was of course working in the other direction. And this has got a stitch running in front of it. This stitch was purled in the previous row, and that means that on this row we're going to run the stitch in front of it. This is a knit row, so I've just knitted a stitch, which is the yellow one on my right needle. I'm going to move the yarn forward, slip this stitch purlwise, so you don't turn the stitch by slipping it knitwise. You slip it purlwise so that it presents itself like a normal purl stitch on the way back, and you move the yarn back again. So now I've got a purple stitch with the yellow yarn running in front. The next stitch, which has been slipped in the previous row, is going to be knitted. There's the little yarn running in front of it from the previous row. So I'm going to knit this one. And I keep repeating that. So I'm going to move my yarn forward. I'm going to slip the next stitch purlwise, move the yarn back, and knit the next stitch. As you can see, it's got the little loop in front of it from the previous row. I'll do a couple more. Move the yarn forward, slip the stitch purlwise, yarn back, knit the next stitch. You can see that they kind of present themselves in pairs because the little loop that's running in front of the next stitch that I'm going to knit pulls a little bit. So they kind of pull into pairs, they pull close together. So you need to be mindful when you're knitting this that either you feel with your fingers how they present in little pairs, or if you're not working with a lot of light, or you look very closely because it's easy to trap two stitches at the same time. You don't want to do that. So if you imagine that I got to the end of my row, if this would be the last stitch of my row, I would just knit it. If this would be the last stitch of my row, instead of slipping the yarn in front, I would knit it as well. So let's pretend it's not really going to make a difference going the other way. Because what I'm going to do now is pretend that this was the end of my row, turn my work and purl back. Slipping the first stitch. Now this stitch was knitted, which is why it's yellow. So now we want to slip it. We don't want to knit it again, we're going to slip it on this row. So we move the yarn backwards because this is a purl row, slip the stitch purlwise so it doesn't twist, move the yarn back again, and now we're going to purl the stitch that was slipped in the previous row. So you effectively only work half of your total number of stitches each row. That is why the linen stitch is a slow stitch to knit, or to work rather. Slip your yellow, come back, purl the purple. Slip your yarn to the back again, slip your yellow stitch, yarn comes back forward, purl. Yarn to the back, slip, yarn back forward, purl. Because I'm holding this up in front of the camera, it's a bit wobbly and it's not very fast. I'm trying to make it clear as well what I'm doing. But once you get into a rhythm, it's a bit like knitting a rib. You end up going very fast. So even though your progress is slow, your knitting can be as fast as it normally is. We're nearly at the end, so I'll keep going right to the end because I also want to show you what it looks like when all your stitches are one color. And with the yellow yarn, hopefully that will show clearly enough on the camera. What I've got left here, I've got two very, very loose stitches. Slip this one, purl this one at the end. The reason that they're so loose is because I changed color, of course, at the end, at the beginning of this round there, row. There we are. So now all the stitches in the little section that I have just worked are yellow, and you can see the little pattern of loops running in front. Can you see that there are two rows of the little lines, this row and that row? This is the slipped stitch, the yarn from the slipped stitch of my knit row, and these are the slipped stitches from my purl row. So if I now am going to knit the next round, what am I going to do? Of row, I keep saying round, sorry about that. So I'll knit my first one. This one you can clearly see was slipped just now, so I'm going to knit it. The next one you can see was worked. It doesn't have, it's got this line running in front of it, but it's running in front of the purple stitch that was from the knit row. So this one is going to be slipped again. This, here's my little pair, see that? The first one was a slipped stitch, so I'm going to knit it. The next one was a purled stitch, so I'm going to slip it. Next little set of 2, knit the first, slip the second. And ultimately, that's it. Make sure you always have 1 or 2 knit stitches at the beginning and the end of, or slip purl stitches at the beginning and the end of each row, so you don't have any of these loose tiny little floats. But apart from that, that's it. You'll notice that your gauge changes significantly from stocking stitch when you're knitting this, because your tiny mini floats end up pulling the knitting more together and makes it less stretchy as well. That's one of the reasons that it feels a little bit like it's been woven rather than knitted, because those prominent tiny little floats that always all run on the front side, the right side of your work, the knit side of your work, end up making a very smooth fabric that almost looks and feels woven. Meanwhile, of course, the back is full of little purl bumps, which is a really, really nice and pleasing looking fabric as well. It's very pretty. It feels very nice. It's very bumpy. It reminds a little bit of moss stitch or seed stitch, but it's actually the back of your linen stitch. To compare them, see if I can show both of them together. You've got the smooth side with your little slipped stitches on one side and then your purl bumps on the other side. That's it. There's the linen stitch in action. The next thing I would like to show you is how I made the little tassels that run along the edge of the Kwasten scarf. The word Kwasten is the Dutch word for tassels. I just take a normal piece of white paper, but you can also use cardboard or thick paper card, whatever you prefer. It can even be a piece of plastic or a ruler if it's the right width. But what you want to end up with is something that is approximately an inch in width. So what I'm doing, I've got an A5 piece of paper and I'm going to fold it up a couple of times to end up with a width that I'm happy with. I'm kind of eyeballing an inch width because it doesn't come that close. The most important thing is that they're all about the same length. Excuse me, that disappeared out of the picture. Just folding it over until I've got a width and a thickness that withstands a little bit of folding and pushing and pulling. That's all I've done. About an inch width is fine. I grab one end of the yarn and hold it onto the paper. I want to keep hold of that end because I want to use it to help tie off my tassel when it's done. So you keep that out of the way and then start winding the yarn. 3, 4, 5. I'll keep counting. I'll speed up, but I'll keep counting. The tassels that I have on the sample, the multicolored sample, have 50 little circulations of yarn. So I'm at 5. I'll keep going and speed up. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. I'll do the rest without talking and speeding up so you don't have to sit through it. 50. So I've gone around the piece of card 50 times and I'm holding on to it so that I don't come back off, and I've got these two ends about 4 inches. So I take some scissors and I cut my other end also to about 4 inches. Doesn't come too close. You just want to have enough to work with. Then what I do is take both ends and tie them in a double knot. It's one of those things where you think, gosh, it would be handy to have 3 hands, or maybe you can be more prepared than I am and have a little clip to keep your ends in place. I don't come that prepared, as you can see. So I'm improvising how to make a double knot without losing track of my 2 ends and letting them run amok. There we go. Just a single double knot right on the edge of the paper. I'm going to make sure that I grab all the ends together here so that they can't move anywhere before I tie the tassel off altogether. So I get a needle, loop one of my ends through, and I pull them underneath. I go through against the card and pull this through. See that? It ties, it pulls together all my little loops. Go together like twice or so, go through 2 or 3 times, and now I'm going to tie these ends together again. I don't have to really keep things in place with my thumb this time. It's linen, it doesn't stretch much, it's not very bouncy, so it's relatively easy to keep things in place now. As a matter of interest, you see the little slub in the linen here? Those are the same slubs that you can see in the finished fabric when it is woven. It is a natural material, linen, and to a certain extent it will do its own thing. This is 3 threads of the weaving yarn plied together, and you can see how big this slub is. That just comes from one of the threads. So these slubs work themselves into the fabric as well, which is something I absolutely love. I think it's really pretty and it looks really good. So here we are. This can now come off because we're going to tie the next dent it a little bit because it's tight, of course. And you know, you can bend it and kind of straighten it a little bit for the next one if you make a whole bunch of them. So we've got the 2 ends tied around the one side of the loop, and I'm using that now to really pull this right to the top. like this. I now take my second yarn, contrasting color, to make the little cuff. Here's a nice one, teal. You can just cut a piece of this off if you like, if you prefer, in advance before you start doing this, or just work from the little ball, which is what I'm doing. Doesn't really matter. There's no right or wrong about it. Take my bit of paper out of the way. There's my little ball. I still have my needle close at hand because I'm going to use that again in a minute. So now I've got one end of the teal yarn that I want to hold on to, just like I did when I was winding around the paper. Only instead of the paper, I'm now winding around the tassel. As I said before, these two ends, I lay them together with the rest. I hold on, and then about this far from the top, I wind. And in my case, and with the other scarf that I made, I give it about 15 turns. I think that makes a nice size. I haven't counted it, but it looks about right. I take my other end, which is caught, of course, underneath my revolutions, and I do the same thing I did before. I make another double knot, making sure not to let go of my end. One single knot kind of traps the thread already. Because it's all very light, it doesn't, and not bouncy, it doesn't go anywhere. So pull it tight, turn it into a double knot. And there's your little cuff. Again, cut that off at a length of about 4 inches. And now I want to get rid of both of these ends. I cut them both the same length, so they're easy to string onto my needle together. Ah, too short and my needle's too long. See, I need to do this the other way around. So instead of going in with the yarn into my needle first, I do it the other way around. I push the needle through the cuff and all the way to the top of my tassel. If you're finding it hard, doesn't want to go through very easily, then one thing you can do is help either by wearing some protection on your fingers or pushing it through this way. Not too far, because we want to string our ends through. Ends through the needle. Try to catch them all. Can't tell you how awkward this is doing this through a camera. Okay, it's starting to look promising. Yes, I've got them. Okay. So now I pull this through. Done. So now we have a tassel with two ends up here that can be used to tie it off against the scarf. Paper out of the way again. Cut this to the length of the others. And then all that's left to do is to cut through the bottom. You probably won't get them all in one go, so you have to cut a number of times and kind of stick the scissors through to find any loops that have got missed. Nope, looks like I've got them all. There we are. One cute little tassel ready to be tied off onto a scarf. Now this particular colorway, of course, I wouldn't use with the one that I'm knitting at the moment. The tassels that are going to go onto this one are going to be purple and green and, you know, the gradients in between. But imagine that this is the project that it's going to go on. On the edge of the project, you've got all these little sets of 2 pieces of yarn. So when it comes to tying this off, you literally are going to take your 2 sets of yarn, make a double knot by tying it as close as possible, tie the tassel as close as possible to the fabric of your scarf. I'm holding it with my thumb so that it won't be able to go anywhere, and tie a double knot. Again, this is relatively easy to keep in place because the linen is pliable and not bouncy. Tie into a double knot, and then all you do is, again, take these ends, put them through your needle, and just like I went up with the yarn from my little cuff, I now go down through the middle of my tassel with both of these sets of ends and then snip them to the right length. So every tassel will have a core of these different colors in it, but that's it, tassel attached. I think that is all that I had to talk about this time. Yeah, I think that's it. See you next time for another knitting update.